The rifle sits behind glass under calm museum lights. Walnut stock, slim barrel, a modest scope mounted low. To most visitors, it is just an old hunting rifle in a room full of louder, more menacing weapons. But for 4 days in the groves west of Point Cruz on Guadalcanal, that quiet Winchester Model 70 did what an entire infantry battalion could not. It hunted down 11 Japanese snipers who owned the jungle. Before the war, John George was not a famous soldier. He was a young Illinois officer who loved the discipline of long-range shooting. In 1939, he became the Illinois state champion at 1,000 yards, the youngest ever to do it. His world was wind calls, tiny groups on paper, perfectly tuned triggers. He believed something simple and unfashionable, that one man with the right rifle, properly used, could change a fight. The United States Army did not share that faith. It trusted the M1 Garand, a heavy, semi-automatic rifle that could be stamped out by the hundreds of thousands. Every man carried the same weapon, loaded the same ammunition, trained the same way. When George spent 2 years of National Guard pay on a Winchester Model 70 with a mail-order Lyman Alaskan scope, his fellow officers laughed. The armorer wanted to know if it was for deer or Germans. His captain called it a sporting toy and told him to carry a real weapon. Then the war moved faster than the Postal Service. George boarded a troopship without his prized rifle. It sat in a warehouse in Illinois while he crossed the Pacific, and while the Marines fought and bled for Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. Only in late December, after the 132nd Infantry relieved the exhausted Marines, did a supply sergeant finally hand George a crate marked fragile. Inside was the same rifle he had cleaned and packed in Tennessee, still coated in protective grease. Guadalcanal was already a graveyard of plans. The Marines had held Henderson Field, but the Japanese still clung to Mount Austin and to the tangled groves west of the Matanuca River. George's battalion attacked the Gifu, a hill mass the Japanese had laced with bunkers and machine gun nests. For 16 days they fought up its slopes and through its ravines, losing dozens of men. In that close, brutal fighting, there was no time for quiet glassing through a scope. George's Winchester stayed largely silent. His reputation as the officer with the mail-order sweetheart remained a joke. The joke ended in the Point Cruz groves. There, the Japanese were not defending bunkers. They were hidden in the trees. A handful of snipers with scoped Arisaka rifles had learned every branch and shadow. They climbed before dawn, settled into the crowns of giant banyan trees, and waited through blistering days without moving. In 72 hours, they killed 14 Americans, men filling canteens, men on patrol, men who never saw where the bullets came from. By the night of January 21st, 1943, the battalion commander understood he had a problem rifles in the usual way could not solve. He called George in and asked about the rifle everyone had mocked. Could it actually hit anything? George did not brag. He simply laid out the facts, the state championship, the tight groups. At long range, the hours spent tuning his trigger until it broke like glass. The commander gave him until morning. If that civilian rifle could not prove itself, it would stay in the tent. At dawn, George walked alone to the ruins of a Japanese bunker that overlooked the coconut and banyan groves west of Point Cruz. He brought no spotter, no radio, just the Winchester, a canteen, and 60 rounds of .30-06 ammunition. He cleaned away the last of the cosmoline, checked the scope mounts, and settled into the darkness of the bunker to watch. The jungle was never quiet. Insects, birds, distant artillery, the rustle of leaves. Through 2.5 power of magnification, the banyans became jungles within the jungle, layers of branches and knots where any dark shape might be. A man or just a trick of light. George scanned slowly, left to right, top to bottom, forcing his eyes to ignore the constant background motion and wait for something deliberate. At 9:17 he saw it. A branch moved where the air was still. 87 feet up, in the fork of 3 limbs, a dark figure took shape. A Japanese sniper, facing east toward the supply trail. The distance, 240 yards, was nothing new to George. The situation was, this time the target could shoot back. He made a small wind adjustment, eased his breathing, and let the trigger break on its own. The Winchester kicked. The sound cracked across the grove. In the banyan, the sniper jerked and fell, crashing down through 90 feet of branches to the ground. George did not celebrate. Japanese snipers worked in pairs. If he had killed the shooter, the spotter was still out there, maybe in the same tree, maybe watching from another. He worked the bolt, reloaded, and went back to the slow, careful scan. Within half an hour, he found the second man, lower down in another tree, climbing to move positions after hearing the shot. George led him slightly and fired. The body fell, and the rifle clattered through the branches ahead of it. By noon that first day, George had killed 5 snipers. Men who had once laughed at his sporting rifle now treated it with quiet respect. He kept them away from his position. Extra bodies drew fire, and fire drew artillery. Late in the morning, a round from a sniper he had not yet found punched into a sandbag 6 inches from his head and showered his face with dust. He rolled aside, lay still, and patiently hunted the source until he picked out a slight distortion in a mass of leaves. One more shot, one more body falling without a sound. When he finally climbed out of the bunker that evening, he had spent 9 hours in the same cramped position and had 8 confirmed dead, 12 shots fired for misses. It was the kind of cold arithmetic only a marksman and a commander can fully feel. 11 snipers in the grove, now 3 left. The next day, the island itself joined the fight. Heavy tropical rain turned the air into a white curtain and the jungle floor into mud. George waited, listening to the drumming on the bunker roof, until the rain weakened enough for him to see. He spotted a sniper who had climbed into position during the storm, trusting the noise to mask him. The range was longer now, close to 300 yards. George compensated, fired, and watched another figure tumble from a distant tree. The Japanese answered with mortars. They had triangulated his firing position. Shells began to walk in toward the bunker in careful steps, 40 yards short, 20 yards short. George grabbed his rifle and ran. He dove into a shell crater moments before a final salvo obliterated the bunker where he had spent the past 2 days. Position, not skill, would have killed him if he had stayed. He shifted to a fallen tree and resumed the grim pattern. Spot movements, breathe, fire once, move only when the enemy forced him. By the end of the second day, 8 of the original 11 snipers were dead. The men who remained were not careless. They had watched their partners fall from branches. They had listened to the single, distinct crack of a civilian rifle they had never seen before. On the third day, George changed first. Heavy rain at dawn gave him cover to move to a new spot, a cluster of rocks the Marines had once used as a machine gun nest. From that slightly elevated position, he began to scan again. Before long, he found a sniper sitting low in a palm tree, only 40 feet up. The fronds gave concealment, but from George's angle, the hide was almost obvious. It was too obvious. After 3 days of hunting snipers, his instincts warned him away from any target that looked easy. He left the man in the palm tree in his scope, but let his eyes drift back to the surrounding jungle, searching for the real threat that would be watching over this decoy. After long, patient minutes, he found it. Another sniper, high in a banyan, perfectly concealed from most angles, with a clear field of fire toward the position George had used the day before. It was a trap. The palm tree sniper was the bait. The banyan sniper was waiting for a muzzle flash from the wrong place. George reversed it. He shot the bait first, then swung the Winchester and caught the real sniper as he shifted to face the unexpected sound from the rocks. 2 more bodies dropped. Moments later, machine gun fire chewed through the rocks he had just left. Once again, movement and caution saved him as much as marksmanship. By late morning, the last enemy sniper changed the rules entirely. George realized, suddenly, that he was looking in the wrong place. The 11th man was not in the trees at all. He was on the ground, crawling through undergrowth. Along the route George had used to escape the machine gun, ferns and vines hid his approach. He was hunting the hunter. What followed was a tense, close-range chess match at jungle level. One Japanese soldier occupied the same rock position as bait, watching the direction George was supposed to be. Another lay behind a fallen log, covering it. They signaled, then began to sweep east. To flush him out, they passed within yards of the water-filled shell crater where George lay submerged to his chin, holding his rifle vertical to keep the barrel dry. When they finally moved past and turned their backs, he rose carefully from the water, mud and water streaming from his uniform, shouldered the Winchester, and fired. The The man from the rocks fell. George worked the bolt and shot. The second as he turned. 11 snipers had entered the groves. 11 now lay dead. The jungle, however, was not empty. Voices drifted through the trees. Japanese infantry coming to recover there. On dead, they followed his boot prints back to the crater. In the muddy chaos that followed, George fought off a patrol at close range with a bolt-action rifle, firing from the water, then from behind a log, and finally escaping by sprinting toward the American perimeter with only 2 rounds left in his pockets. It was a reminder that no matter how precise the shooting, a single man with a scoped rifle cannot hold ground alone. What he could do was teach. Word of the 4-day duel at Point Cruz reached higher headquarters. A regimental commander saw not just an individual feat, but a missing capability. The Marines had left behind a handful of Springfield rifles with long, unertl scopes. The regiment had dozens of expert marksmen. George was ordered to build something new, a sniper section. On a rough range east of Henderson Field, he brought those men back to basics. Breathing, trigger control, reading mirage and wind in the humid island air. He had them shoot from rocks and logs, through brush, at targets half hidden by vegetation. He paired them into 2-man teams, shooter and spotter, both able to swap roles. Then he took them into the field. In a few short weeks, that small section killed at least 74 Japanese soldiers in carefully documented sniper operations, without losing a man to enemy fire in those missions. Quietly, the army began to understand that precision had a place alongside volume. The war moved on. George went on to another brutal theater as part of Merrill's Marauders in Burma, carrying the same Winchester through mountain jungles and long-range patrols. There he learned a different lesson. In weeks of marching and disease and close-range ambushes, he fired the Model 70 only a handful of times. Most fights were at 50 yards or less, through walls of foliage. The rifle that had dominated the groves of Guadalcanal became just one tool in a larger struggle, won mainly by endurance and logistics. After Burma, his war with that rifle was essentially over. He returned to the United States, trained other officers, and eventually left the Army as a lieutenant colonel with decorations on his chest and scars on his body. He put the Winchester away in a case. He entered Princeton on the GI Bill, then Oxford, then the world of African politics and diplomacy. For years he rarely mentioned Guadalcanal or Burma, but he did write. In the late 1940s he produced a long, careful study of the weapons and tactics he had seen in the Pacific, a book called Shots Fired in Anger. It was not a piece of hero worship. It was a craftsman's notebook. What worked, what failed, what soldiers believed that turned out not to be true. His descriptions of Japanese rifles and jungle tactics became reference points for historians and collectors for decades. John George lived long enough to see new rifles replace the Garand. New wars echo some of the same mistakes, and sniping become a formal military specialty. The skill that had once been a private obsession with a mail-order scope turned into an institutional discipline, taught in schools rather than improvised in bunkers. When he died in 2009, at 90 years old, the Winchester Model 70 that had hunted Japanese snipers above Point Cruz went to the National Firearms Museum. It sits there now, behind glass, easy to overlook. But it carries a quiet truth. It shows that in a war dominated by factories and fleets, there was still room for one man, lying alone in the dark with a rifle he knew by heart, to change the fate of those around him. It reminds the modern world that faith cannot armor steel, and courage does not replace logistics, but skill, patience, and clear thinking still matter, even when history seems to be written only in tonnage and numbers. They did not just lose a battle in those groves. The Japanese snipers lost their sense of invulnerability, and the American army lost the notion that a sporting rifle was a joke on a modern battlefield. That quiet Winchester behind the glass proves that one careful mind, given the right tool and a little space to work, can still reach out across a few hundred yards and alter the shape of a war.